The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, but early in the morning he arrived again in the temple area, and all the people started coming to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and they made her stand in the middle. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" They said this to test him so that they could have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. But when they continued asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he bent down and wrote on the ground, and in response they went away one by one, beginning with the elders. So he was left alone with the woman before him. Then Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She replied, "No one, sir." But then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on do not sin anymore." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Well, spring break is almost over. We have to go back to that penance of school. Well, there may be some things you like about it, but oh well. Nevertheless, the Lord does good things through penances that we accept in this world, things that we are willing to do, not necessarily because we want, but because someone else asks, and it's not evil, it's something that is necessary, or it is a good thing to do, even if it's a hard thing to do. But here today we hear of a hard gospel, a difficult gospel, but at the same time, what is being talked about? Two things: condemnation and forgiveness. They're both being talked about today, and note that Jesus says, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." What does this elicit? We kind of talked about it right at the beginning of Mass. A confession from everyone, because they all started to drop their stones. They all joined in one communal admittance that they too were sinners, just like this woman caught in adultery. And in fact, again, we won't go into details because of some of the younger people in here, but adultery is a sin that takes two people. Where was the guy? Was he one of them standing right there in the crowd? Did he actually have a stone in his hand? It said they caught them in the act. That means they caught them, not her. So they were all guilty, and all yet ready to condemn the one alone, the woman that stood before all. So Jesus says, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." There was one among them without sin. Yes, Jesus. How shout it out, Jesus. He was the one among them without sin, and he was the only one without a stone in his hand. Isn't that ironic? The only one who had the right, according to what he said, to cast a stone, is the only one that does not will to do so. In fact, he says, "Neither do I condemn you." Where are your accusers? Neither do I condemn you. Yet, it is what he said right after that I want to focus on today. What does he say right after that? "Go, and from now on do not sin anymore." Those are the words, I think, that are most poignant today. She was not condemned, but neither was her conduct excused, just like anyone else in the crowd. No excuses for their conduct. They were all sinners. She was forgiven, but also given a command: do not sin anymore. Isaiah said today in the first reading, remember not the events of the past, the sins that you've committed, the things of long ago. Consider not, he says, all the things that we were maybe entrapped in when we were young. See, I am doing something new. I'm doing something new. In the sacrament of reconciliation, there are three elements necessary for each and every one of us, Father included, to come with, in addition to confessing my sins to the priest that hears my sins. I have to have contrition and do penance. So contrition meaning I have to be sorry, and I have to do some penance, and the penance is generally meant to try and pray against that spirit of temptation in my heart, spirit of sin in my heart, and even for the people maybe that I've offended. But there's a third thing in there. It's called a purpose of amendment. A purpose of amendment. And that's what Jesus is commanding her to have today. Go and sin no more. Purpose of amendment means I'm walking out of that confessional with the desire in my heart not to do the sins that I have done prior to coming to the confessional. Now, does that mean that we should be at a point where we're sure we're never going to sin again before we can go to confession? And I know that people have struggled with that. I want to get rid of this sin before I go, and I want to conquer this sin before I ever go to confession so that I don't have to be embarrassed going through that over and over and over again. No, that's not what you should do, and that's not what we're talking about. Not going to conquer all sin before we come to the Lord. And nevertheless, what does it mean? It means that at the moment that I am confessing, that I am receiving the Lord's forgiveness, that deep down it is truly my desire that I would never do this again. It's my desire. I want that desire in my heart, or otherwise I'm never going to start transitioning and working towards overcoming some things. I can't just walk out thinking, well, I can't wait to get back to sinning, or since I got this outlet, I can do whatever I want. I just come back as many times as I need to. I get a free ticket every time. No, wrong attitudes, and we all know that. Yet that is not generally the problem we have in our culture today and in many cultures before us. The problem that I see may be more along the lines that I think it is not possible to quit sinning. Can't overcome it. So what's the use of confessing? That, I think, is more of what we struggle with. If it is, because again, it would make sense to think like that. If it's true, if it's not possible to stop sinning, then how could I be responsible for it? Or what the term that the church uses, the big term uses is culpable. How could I be culpable if it's impossible to stop? And we know today, and I don't want to pick on psychologists or any counselors that are here. Well, this is one of them. But pop psychology today is great at endorsing the blame game. Pull out the victim card. Well, look at my upbringing. Look at what I was up against. Look at the abuses I went through. Look at the events that I experienced in my life. If you read the lives of the saints, you realize that the saints, in fact, too, went through all of those things. The saints, in fact, sinned. But the difference and what makes a saint is this, that even though they went through all of that, they had all the things that they had to suffer, they nevertheless lamented their sins and repented for their sins over and over and over again. We'll get to heaven and find out all the saints said, yes, I confess the same sins over and over and over again, just like me, just like you. Sinners, on the other hand, and what I mean by that are people who accept sin as impossible to stop, make excuses for it. And as many of you know, I've talked about this in my own life. I was there half of my life, up till about 27, accepting that as the excuse for why I didn't have to change my life. How could I be responsible? God knew all that I went through. He knew all the people that had struggles around me and contributed to my struggles. He knew how weak I was compared to the powerful sinful tendencies that were in me. He knew all that. He understood. And if you know my story again, the problem was that she didn't. And pointing to Our Lady for those who are at home. And of course, God didn't either. But I mean, if you know that, again, what happened to me was hearing some words that she said at a vision in Fatima to a couple of children, and meant through those children to tell the world, stop offending God. He is already much offended. And for the first time in my life, I would have been, prior to that, offended that anyone said that to me. How could I be offending God? Again, he knows all that I've gone through. He knows all the struggles. It was then that I realized that I could. I mean, for the first time, I wasn't thinking about myself for just a moment. It took 27 years, and there was finally a moment that flashed that don't think about yourself. Why don't you truly think about God? That something you could do could hurt him. Could hurt him. And then the reality came that if I was capable of offending, of hurting him, and that wouldn't be reality if I wasn't capable of stopping it, then I am capable of stopping sin. Again, if I'm capable of offending him, that means I am capable of stopping offending him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be offended. If I wasn't capable, why would he be offended? He knows I can't stop. I want to read again from our saints, one of the saints that I love greatly, especially in this area. He wrote a book called Confessions, confessing his struggle with going from the same kind of attitude, I can't stop this, might as well give in, to finally saying, yes, I can, with God's grace. And of course, that's St. Augustine. So let me read from him. He said, I desired such freedom from sin. I desired it, but was bound not by an iron imposed by anyone else, but by the iron of my own choice. The enemy had a grip on me, on my will, and so made a chain for me to hold me as a prisoner. But this was the consequence, he says, of a distorted will, which comes from passion. He says the consequence of a distorted will is passion, meaning giving in to my feelings. Whatever I want, just give in, don't put up any fight. By servitude to passion, or my feelings, he said, habit is formed. And habit to which there is no resistance becomes necessity. I've got to do it. I can't live without it. He says it becomes necessity, or at least, again, the feeling of necessity. But I was responsible for the fact that habit had become so embattled against me, for it was with my consent that I came to the place in which I did not wish to be. He didn't wish to be there, but he's admitting, like I had to, that a lot of how I got here was me, was what I allowed to happen. And St. Paul says today, addressing the full righteousness that we all desire the full righteousness of God, but he says it this way, he says, it is not yet that I have already taken hold of it, or that I have already attained perfect maturity, but I continue my pursuit and hope that I may possess it. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore. This doesn't mean that I won't slip and fall. We do it. But it does mean that there is no excuse for me not trying to get better, not trying, not striving, not coming to the Lord and asking for his grace, his forgiveness. There is no excuse for me to just be okay with offending God and just accepting it without some effort to stop. In fact, with his grace and my efforts, I may indeed begin to overcome sin, especially the big stuff, especially the big ones, like we hear about in the gospel today. Pray God, nobody's struggling with that. But there are bigger things that we could overcome, and maybe never the little ones, or strive till the end to get over the little ones, but nevertheless, striving. I may even get to where I can, with Jesus' help, put it all in the past. Put a lot of it into the past. And, as St. Paul says, forgetting what lies behind, I can strain forward to what is ahead. And he says it this way, what's ahead? God's upward calling in Jesus Christ. So, my brothers and sisters, let us all strain and work hard to do what we can, and then be, in a sense, a mediator to the world, someone that can go out and tell the world, no, we can start to work to overcome these things. We don't have to be like Augustine constantly saying, I want, but I can't. We want, and there may be some truth that I can't, but I want, and he can. He can help me to obtain this righteousness that I so desire, as well as everyone else in the world.